Welcome back, everyone, and happy Memorial Day. We're going to be reading some stories based on this first story. It's about the American Revolution, but we're going to be reading various stories about our men and women in uniform. So we hope that you stick around with us for our other stories about spring and summer and about new growth and taking bold action together. We hope these stories will inspire you to live boldly, take wise chances, and with our friends and family make a difference together. So our first book is Victory or Death, Stories of the American Revolution by Doreen Rappaport and Joan Verniero, and illustrated by Greg Call. So go ahead and lean in with the spirit of adventure, grab a friend, and let's enjoy the story together. This chapter is called The Oath, Francis Salvador. Patriots and Loyalists actively campaigned to win over their neighbors to their ways of thinking. In the backcountry of South Carolina, both groups had militias. So, like their own armies, essentially. Not big ones, but South Carolina's patriots held meetings to win converts to the cause of independence and to get them to swear an oath of loyalty. Anyone who signed the oath vowed to support the cause of independence and the decisions of the Continental Congress. The British considered signing the oath an act of treason, punishable by death. Lovely. Francis Salvador pulled his horse to a halt at Fort Boone. The pasture land was lush and green this late August afternoon of 1775. He admired the powerful flow of Long Cane Creek just below the preaching shed. Long Cane Creek was much higher than the creeks near his plantation 40 miles east. Numerous horses and wagons spotted the adjacent field. He was pleased by the size of the crowd this morning. Dismounting, he nodded his approval to his travel companion, William Tennant. Over recent weeks, they had visited many settlements like Fort Boone, trying to get signatures for the oath of loyalty. They tethered their horses around the trunk of a giant chestnut tree. Salvador took a leather case from his saddlebag. It contained the all-important oath. He watched Tennant walk towards the shed, his Bible in his hand. His friend was ready to deliver his sermon. The two men had ridden 12 miles, again, on horseback, 12 miles afar, since early morning after an uncomfortable night's sleep on the broken clay floor of the kindly farmer's house. How different was this South Carolina wilderness from Salvador's home in London. 2 years ago, at his uncle's suggestion, the 28-year-old nobleman had left his wife and 4 children in England to come here and save what was left of the family fortune. It had been a wise decision. The family plantation was rich land. Some of his neighbors called his 1,790 acres Karunika, or corn acre, after the region's most plentiful crop. This year's corn and indigo looked to be even better than last year's. But what good would bumper crops be if England decided to tax them? Today's meeting was not going to be easy. Most farmers in this part of South Carolina were poor and dependent on selling their crops to England. Signing the oath meant you agreed to stop trading with England. These farmers didn't like the English Parliament telling them what to do, and they weren't sure they wanted the Continental Congress to make decisions for them either. Salvador found a seat at the back of the shed and looked about at mostly unfamiliar faces. He was relieved to see very few guns. At last week's meeting on the Inouye River, Loyalist Colonel Thomas Fletchhole and 3 men from his militia had stood with pointed pistols throughout the meeting, the guns that scared almost everyone from signing the oath. Man, that's intense if you still sign the oath when people are pointing stuff at you. That's resolve. The backcountry farmers dressed like Salvador did in leather jerkins and homespun shirts. Soon after arriving in South Carolina, he put away his velvet suits, powdered wigs, and low-cut shoes with silver buckles. Although he was wealthier than most of these men, he had much in common with them. Many farmers were Scotch-Irish Presbyterians. They had been forced by King James I to immigrate from Scotland to Northern Ireland. Prejudice followed them there, so they moved to the New World, hoping for a fresh start. Like these farmers, Salvador was no stranger to religious persecution. He was a Jew. 300 years ago, his people had been expelled from Portugal. His family resettled in Holland. The shadow of anti-Semitism eventually surfaced there, so the family moved to England. They found prejudice in England, too. His uncle, Joseph Salvador, had brought a delegation of wealthy Portuguese Jews to King George III to pay their respects when he took the throne. Afterward, when Joseph Salvador pressed for a law to make Portuguese Jews naturalized citizens of England, he was booed in a theater and forced to leave. The bill never passed Parliament. Now his nephew was dedicated to freedom in South Carolina. Standing at the front of the shed, Reverend William Tennant opened his Bible and called the meeting to order. His voice boomed. "I said to the king, may the king live forever." The loyalists cheered his words honoring a king. Salvador waited to hear what would come next. He was unfamiliar with these words from the Old Testament, but he knew that his friend had no intention of praising royalty. Tennant invoked the Bible whenever he spoke. It helped soften people and win them over to his viewpoint. The Reverend continued, "Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The city was Jerusalem. He was trying to help the audience understand that South Carolina, like Jerusalem, was ruled by an outsider who cared little for their wishes. Salvador appreciated the Reverend's style and zeal. No matter how many times he heard him speak, he was always affected by his fiery voice. "Long live King George III!" someone shouted. Other loyalists echoed the sentiment. "Down with unfair taxation without representation," countered a patriot. "What does King George know of our life here?" yelled another. "Traitor! Redcoat lover!" In the past month, Salvador had heard these accusations over and over again in the back country. William Tennant shouted for order. "In the words of the Continental Congress in Philadelphia," he bellowed, "we will not import goods from England into British America." "There is no British America," a patriot shouted. "That's what you say," a loyalist yelled. Tennant continued as though he did not hear the shouts and the booing and clapping that followed. "Starting 2 weeks, we will not export or import anything to or from Great Britain or Ireland. We will still export rice to Europe." "How are we supposed to support our families if we can't sell our goods?" Francis Salvador stood. "If we continue to feed England, how can we force King George to recognize our demands?" "Here, here, down with exports!" "Easy for a cattle trader to say, you'll get by, but we farmers won't." John Harris, the minister at the Long Cane Creek area, stepped up to the front of the shed and took over. "The Gospel according to Mark," he began. "Listen, a sower went out to sow." The crowd grew quiet, for they knew this familiar passage from the New Testament. "And as he sowed," Harris continued, "some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky ground where it did not have much soil, and when the sun rose, it was scorched. Other seed fell among thorns and choked. Other seed fell into good soil and brought forth grain." Harris explained his words in simple, clear language. "The good soil is each farmer who sows seeds of justice in his fields. When you step forward to sign the oath of loyalty, you too will share in the ideals of the kingdom of heaven while on earth." His words quieted even the opposition. John Harris grabbed the moment. "Mr. Salvador, bring the oath forward." But before Salvador could get to the front of the shed, someone yelled, "If we sign, how will you help us protect ourselves against the loyalist militia?" "Our militia doesn't have enough gunpowder to fight," another patriot added. "By the authority of the Provincial Congress of South Carolina," Tennant said, "I promise to get you gunpowder." He lowered his voice and leaned towards the audience. "But now I make the motion that it is time to sign the oath," he said. "I second the motion," shouted Harris. "I second it too," said Salvador. More shouting. Loyalists and patriots alike accused one another of wanting to solve their differences with guns. People called out the names of friends who had been threatened with guns to change their mind about independence. They shouted about the brutality of the other side. Harris ignored the shouting and nodded towards Francis Salvador. Salvador opened the case on the small wooden table below the platform where William Tennant and John Harris were standing. He removed his cool pen and inkwell and put them on the table. Next to them, he placed the oath of loyalty. Salvador heard grumbling among the loyalists. He looked up and saw a long line of men coming forward to sign. The patriots had won the argument today. His uncle would be proud. Clashes between loyalists and patriots in the back country continued as the colonists moved towards independence. The British tried to win the Cherokees in South Carolina over to their side. They pointed out that American colonists had broken treaties and built frontier settlements on Cherokee land. In May 1776, the Cherokees began the first of many devastating attacks on South Carolina frontier settlements. On July 31st, 1776, as a diversion while the British attempted to take Charleston, formerly Charleston, Loyalists and Cherokees fought the Patriot militia in nearby 96th District. 29-year-old Francis Salvador was killed during this battle. Outnumbered, the Patriots at 96 were forced to retreat. They regrouped, helped by militias from North Carolina and Virginia. They raided and devastated Cherokee settlements over the late summer and early fall. On October 11, 1776, the Cherokees agreed to sign a treaty, giving up a large part of their territory. South Carolina's patriots did not forget Francis Salvador. As mentioned in Abraham J. Carps's The Jewish Experience in America, William Henry Drayton, Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court, wrote of his friend, "The fate of this gentleman excited universal regret. His manners were those of a polished gentleman. As such, he was intimately known and esteemed by the first revolutionary characters in South Carolina." Well, that does it for this chapter, and I hope you'll hear the next one.